Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India, India's voice to the world. I'm Tanvi Taneja. Coming up in the next hour. India hands over the G20 presidency to Brazil. President Lula da Silva congratulates India for its effective leadership. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi holds bilateral talks with the leaders of France, Canada, Germany, Turkey, South Korea and Comoros on the sidelines of the G20 summit. World showers praise on the New Delhi leaders' declaration for striking a balance on Ukraine. And Morocco declares a 3-day national mourning as the death toll crosses 2,000. Survivors of the earthquake sleep out in the open. From India to Brazil, Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India handed over the presidency of the G20 to Lula da Silva as the next holder of the grouping. The Brazilian leader has praised Prime Minister Modi's leadership during this year's G20 summit. President Lula said the preparatory ministerial meetings will be hosted in several cities in all 5 regions of Brazil. All G20 member nations are expected to attend the Rio de Janeiro summit in November 2024.
मैं G20 समिट के समापन की घोषणा करता हूं। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर का रोड मैप सुखद हो। स्वस्ति अस्तु विश्वस्य, यानी संपूर्ण विश्व में आशा और शांति का संचार हो। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की इसी मंगल कामना के साथ आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
While addressing the closing session of the G20 summit, President Lula of Brazil congratulated Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for efficiently leading the G20 bloc.
I'd like to congratulate Prime Minister Narendra Modi for the efficient leading of the Indian presidency of the G20 and for the excellent work done in preparing this summit, and also with all the care that he and they gave us in these days that we spent with you. I thank India for its efforts to give voice, for giving voice to the topics of interest to emerging economies. So I would also like to give my salute to our friend, the representative of the African Union, who is a member of G20.
After handing over the presidency, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India has the responsibility of G20 presidency till November this year.
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, जैसा आप सब जानते हैं, भारत के पास नवंबर तक G20 प्रेसिडेंसी की भी जिम्मेदारी है। अभी 2.5 महीने बाकी हैं। इन 2 दिनों में आप सभी ने अनेक बातें यहाँ रखी हैं, सुझाव दिए हैं, बहुत सारे प्रस्ताव रखे हैं। हमारी ये जिम्मेदारी है कि जो सुझाव आए हैं उनको भी एक बार फिर देखा जाए कि उनकी प्रगति में गति कैसे लाई जा सकती है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि हम नवंबर के अंत में G20 का एक वर्चुअल सेशन और रखें। उस सेशन में हम इस समिट के दौरान तय तय विषयों की समीक्षा कर सकते हैं। इन सब की डिटेल्स हमारी टीम आप सभी के साथ शेयर करेगी। मैं उम्मीद करता हूं कि आप सब इससे जुड़ेंगे। योर हाइनेसेस, एक्सेलेंसीज, इसी के साथ मैं G20 समिट के समापन की घोषणा करता हूं। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर का रोड मैप सुखद हो। स्वस्ति अस्तु विश्वस्य, यानी संपूर्ण विश्व में आशा और शांति का संचार हो। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की इसी मंगल कामना के साथ आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Chief Coordinator of India's G20 Presidency, Harshvardhan Shringla, has spoken about the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration adopted at the 18th G20 Summit. Shringla said that reaching a consensus on the very first day of the presidency is a tremendously positive achievement.
We have certainly, I think, in many senses, ensured that the Prime Minister's vision of an ambitious, outcome-oriented, inclusive presidency would be held, I think has been seen in every aspect of the way that we've conducted our presidency right up to the end. And in many senses, I think, the fact that we have an outcome document that reflects consensus among all of our G20 partners, and those partners are from, as you know, from the developed world and from the emerging economies, I think is an extraordinary achievement, but also answers your question that yes, we have achieved that objective, but more important, we've achieved the objectives of the Global South. We've achieved the objectives of articulating the voice of the Global South in the G20 and addressing their core concerns. And we see the outcome documents, this is what it is. We have addressed the requirements and concerns of the Global South.
As the G20 summit concludes, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral talks with some of the visiting leaders on the sidelines of the summit. Modi hosted a lunch in honor of French President Emmanuel Macron. The two leaders discussed a variety of topics. They looked forward to ensuring that India-France relations scaled new heights of progress. India and France share close ties and a strategic partnership. President Macron thanked Prime Minister Modi for doing its utmost for this G20 presidency to serve unity and peace.
In this context of the G20, I would like to commend the African Union for joining G20 as a full-fledged member. As you know, France was amongst the first ones to support this candidacy, and in Bali we launched a call. At the time, Macky Sall was representing the African Union. When it comes to mobilizing international financing to tackle poverty and climate change, this G20 acknowledged a number of developments. First of all, we exceeded the $100 billion of reallocation of SDRs. It is in 2020, at the time that we decided with the IMF to issue some new SDRs. Then, when we worked on financing the African economies, we agreed to reallocate $100 billion to Africa.
India and France enjoy a strong strategic partnership. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the first leader to call on President Macron in Paris after the French leader won re-election last year. The relationship has now reached a new level of cooperation, with France providing several defense and engineering equipment to India.
On its day of national celebration in July, a guest of honor for France. Paris rolling out the red carpet for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. A visit that marked a new milestone in relations between the two countries.
मैं अपने मित्र प्रेसिडेंट मैक्रो के साथ नेशनल डे परेड का हिस्सा बनूंगा। ये आत्मीयता सिर्फ दो देशों के नेताओं के बीच नहीं है, बल्कि ये भारत फ्रांस की अटूट दोस्ती का प्रतिबिंब है, रिफ्लेक्शन है।
India's Prime Minister and the French President Emmanuel Macron keen to forge closer ties between their nations. And to mark the 25th anniversary of their nation's strategic partnership, the two leaders shared selfies on social media, a sign of the warmth between the two leaders, reinforced when Prime Minister Modi was awarded France's highest honor. It's been a strong and perhaps strategic friendship between these two for years. The Prime Minister was the first leader President Macron met after his re-election last year. Now, with India's presidency of the G20, the Prime Minister will host the man he calls his friend. And it's a friendship that has improved the military and economic ties between the two countries. For decades, India has largely relied on Russian defense equipment. It's now shifting to buy more French hardware, like the contract to buy Rafale warplanes for the Indian Air Force, as well as the French Scorpion submarines. It's a win-win. It's a boost for the French defense industry, and it meets India's defense needs. And now, there's also a joint venture, India and France agreeing to make warplane engines together. That's a breakthrough for India's defense industry as well. India and France have been close allies in trade, defense, and in the Pacific, but the friendship between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and French President Emmanuel Macron has only given a strong impetus to the growing relations between these two countries, and this bond is expected to grow only stronger in the coming years. In New Delhi, Akshay Dongre, DD India.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a meeting with EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and President of the European Council Charles Michel. Subjects such as improved connectivity, trade and technology featured prominently in the discussions. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his German counterpart Olaf Scholz also held bilateral talks in New Delhi. Modi thanked Scholz for enriching the G20 summit with his views. It was also discussed that how India and Germany can continue working together in the fields of clean energy, innovation, and work towards creating a better planet. In more such bilateral meetings, the Indian Prime Minister held talks with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the sidelines of the summit. The two leaders spoke about ways to further cement trade and infrastructure linkages between both the countries. Speaking to media in New Delhi, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan described India as its greatest trade partner in South Asia.
Within the context of my visit, I've had the privilege to get together with the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, on a bilateral basis. India is our greatest trade partner in South Asia, and we have great potential to enjoy primarily in the field of economy and many others. And I'm so happy to say that we will be able to enjoy a full opportunity to exercise this potential.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi also met his Canadian counterpart Justin Trudeau on the sidelines of the G20 summit. They discussed the full range of India-Canada ties across different sectors. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau termed India as an extraordinarily important economy in the world and an important trade partner to Canada.
We recognize that India is an extraordinarily important economy in the world and an important partner to Canada on everything from fighting climate change to creating growth and prosperity for citizens. There's always a lot of work to do, and we will continue to do it.
Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also held bilateral talks with Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte in New Delhi. This was in the backdrop of the G20 summit. Both sides held detailed deliberations on vast areas of mutual cooperation. Indian Prime Minister also held bilateral talks with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in New Delhi. PM Modi said that ties between India and Brazil are very strong. Both the leaders talked about ways to boost trade and cooperation in sectors such as agriculture, technology, and so on. Prime Minister Modi also conveyed best wishes to Brazil for holding the upcoming G20 presidency. In this series, Prime Minister Modi had a meeting with Comoros President Azali Assoumani a short while ago. He once again extended congratulations to the African Union for joining the G20 family. Comoros is vital to India's policy of SAGAR, which is an acronym for Security and Growth for All in the region. Their talks focused on ways to enhance cooperation in areas such as shipping, trade and more. So we are getting you more updates on the bilateral meetings being held between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the visiting dignitaries on the sidelines of the G20 summit. In this series, Indian Prime Minister held bilateral talks with Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in New Delhi. The leaders discussed issues of mutual cooperation. So Nigeria is looking to the G20 to bolster investment in developing countries. To that end, it's expected that he will offer assurances to prospective investors that the country is business-friendly. The country's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu said that he said this to business leaders in India who are pledging about $14 billion in investment to the West African nation. Our correspondent Tesem Akende has more.
President Bola Tinubu is in India for the G20, his first official visit to the country since he became president in May. Besides meeting with other global heads of state, this trip is an opportunity to drum up international investment. Tinubu spokesperson Ajuri Ngelale says investments are already flowing in, including an $8 billion pledge from Indorama Petrochemical to expand its fertilizer production and petrochemical facility in Rivers State in Nigeria's South-South region. One of India's largest private steel producers, Jindal Steel and Power Limited, has also committed $3 billion in Nigeria, while Skipper Cell Group has announced a $1.6 billion investment in the country's power sector. President Bola Tinubu has assured them of policies that will guarantee best returns on investments, like reduced taxation and improved security of lives and property, which has been a concern. He's happy that the agreements will manifest in industries and jobs in his country, where over 80 million of the citizens are unemployed. The investments are to come in phases, and President Tinubu says he would ensure Nigeria, under his leadership, becomes the vessel of development, prosperity and democracy in Africa. Tesem Akende in Jos, reporting for DD India.
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi also met President Yoon Suk Yeol of South Korea. Both sides discussed ways for strengthening ties and cooperation in several fields. So these are one of the many bilaterals that have been held between India and the visiting nations for the G20 summit. Now, several visiting leaders have praised Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership in hosting a successful G20 summit. Addressing media in New Delhi, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida termed the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration as a truly meaningful achievement.
Under the leadership of India as this year's chair, we were able to agree on the G20 Leaders' Declaration, which is a truly meaningful achievement. Japan has been engaged in the negotiations with the intent to pass on the outcome of the G7 to the G20. And we were able to hand over to the G20 points that were confirmed at the Hiroshima summit, such as achievement of net zero through diverse pathways according to the situation of each country, establishment of sustainable and resilient agricultural and food systems, and strengthening the delivery of medical countermeasures, MCM. I look forward to working with other leaders to follow up on the outcomes delivered by the G7 and the G20.
And we are now joined by Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. We are also joined by our correspondent, Akshay Dongare. He's at the G20 venue. Welcome both of you to the bulletin. First, let me go over to Akshay. Akshay, what is happening at the Bharat Mandapam right now? What are your sources telling you? Is Prime Minister Narendra Modi expected there shortly?
Well, he is expected here shortly. From the sources, Prime Minister might visit the Craft Mela, the Craft Bazaar, and then he can go to the International Media Center as well to look at the arrangements. In fact, perhaps have a conversation there about the kind of facilities and the kind of coverage that has been for the past 2 to 3 days. It has been truly splendid as far as the arrangements here are concerned. In fact, from where we are standing right now, we can show you a bird's eye view of the entire almost campus of Pragati Maidan, where the G20 summit took place. And in fact, it has become now a textbook example of how the skills of Indian diplomats, how the maneuverability of Indian diplomacy has achieved something which was highly unlikely, and even foreign policy experts were highly doubtful that there will be a joint declaration by these in a world where there are such a deep rift lines as far as countries are concerned. The world is still recovering from the backdrop of COVID-19 and its fallout, and still there are several issues that concern the global south, that concern the developing world, and the consensus that we saw in the joint declaration was not only unprecedented in these kind of times, but it was also, it is also being praised across the world that India was able to, during a time of war, was able to bring together all of these countries to agree to a point, which is in fact for the first time perhaps ever since the war broke out in Ukraine.
Right. Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, what would you say was the single most important achievement of the Delhi Declaration at the G20 summit?
I think the most significant point that came out of the summit was, if you look at the transition from the time that we assumed charge in Bali to the New Delhi Declaration that was announced yesterday, was that we were able to convert the situation of crisis coming out of the COVID pandemic and the concerns coming out of the Ukraine situation into one which is of hope and peace. And I think that is the big message that goes out. Of course, there are other components which are extremely significant, because we were for the first time able to have a much wider participation of the Global South. The Global South has become a much more active voice. We are a spokesman for the Global South. What has also happened is that we've been able to adopt action-oriented programs. The New Delhi Declaration is certainly a message for the future, and I think a very hopeful future. So I think we hand over in a very beautiful way.
Okay. Ambassador Sanjay, yes, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had earlier called for turning the global trust deficit into a relation of trust. To what extent do you think that the G20 summit has succeeded in doing that?
Just look at the leaders' declaration that has been achieved with full consensus. There were so many concerns over a period of time that there may be strong differences, and there may not even be a declaration. We might have to go for something else. But the work that has been done so arduously, the leadership and the guidance that was provided by India was truly exemplary. If you look at the issue of Ukraine, which was one of the sticking points in the issue right through, you find that the language that has been agreed upon is one that emerges from India's way of thinking. You would recall that India had always adopted a very independent position on the Ukraine issue, neither going one way or the other. And in some ways, this very principled position held out. And I think that was one of the points that was able to achieve the consensus. Of course, there are two factors that always bring about consensus. One is the team that is negotiating. And I think there was good negotiating mandate from the leadership. We had an outstanding team, and we were working with outstanding collaborators. So I think we must congratulate the cooperation of the negotiating teams of all sides. The second is the principled positions that are actually articulated, the way this actually takes forward this question and issue of hope for the future. There are people who are wanting to leave this legacy behind, that war is not for this era anymore. And I think that's a resonance that struck very, very deeply.
Yes, and one of the most significant achievements of the G20 summit, if you agree with me, was the admission of the African Union into the grouping. How substantive and how significant is the inclusion of the African Union into the G20?
If you recall, it was actually the G7, G8 which had graduated into the G20. And the reason why it did so was because the two sets of financial crises that had happened at the end of the last century and in the first decade of the century had shown that the G7, G8 were unable to deal with financial crisis. It did need the help and support of the emerging economies. And that's how the G20 began. Today, in the process of development, what we see is that many more of these emerging economies have become significant poles in the global sector, not only in terms of the economy, their manufacturing technology capabilities, but also in terms of the voice that they convey to the global community about the concerns, the challenges, and the opportunities. And therefore, it was very necessary that we have a much better representation of the global South. You would recall that the G20 had moved from initially an era of financial stability as its principal concern to that of growth and development. And also what the G20 had through the emerging economies was to ask for the restructuring or reform of the international governance structures. That is another issue. So in this context, you see very clearly that over the last several decades, the continent of Africa, which is the most promising, the most hopeful, youthful, the one which has got the most resources, was in a sense forgotten. We, of course, had very ancient ties with Africa. We were always integrated with the African aspirations. And so when Prime Minister hosted the Voice of the Global South summit earlier this year, he was able to bring together 125 countries, collate their ideas, which was then presented to the G20 forum. And I think this was the seed through which the idea of having a better representation of Africa came about, and we are so happy. Prime Minister took the initiative of writing personally to the leaders of all the G20 countries, and they all understood and realized the importance of this particular move, and I'm so happy that the African Union is now there, because with that, the Global South is much better represented.
All right. At the summit, Ambassador, it was decided to launch an India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. And this also has been hailed as a historic initiative on connectivity and infrastructure. Your views on this endeavor?
Yes, the India, Middle East, Europe connectivity economic corridor is an extremely significant measure. It happened in the margins of the summit, and it was an initiative in which India and the United States, along with two very strategic partners of ours in the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, were the prime movers. This establishes two things, because as you know, the links between India and the Arab world are age-old. They're very historical, civilizational. We've had contacts of trade and ideas, philosophies, science and technology for millennia. But today, the world has changed. Today, we see that the Arab world, the Arab continent, the Gulf area has in particular become a major center, not just of energy security, but also one in which many, many new ideas of technology and innovation are coming about. Given the very strong links that India has always had with the region, it makes abundant sense for India and the Arab world to expand on this connectivity. And as you have seen in the initial reports that have come out, the connectivity aspect is actually fairly widespread. It is not just one of physical logistics connectivity, but it is also one in which there would be a maritime connect, a rail connect. There would be the development of data transfers. And so it's a very wholesome thing. There's another thing that actually is important in this. You see, the emerging idea that is coming about in the world in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomics is the idea of the Indo-Pacific. And India, for one, has always advocated that Indo-Pacific should not be confined to that particular region, which we normally think of as geographically Indo-Pacific, but extend it further towards the Arab world and towards the African continent. And we've had several initiatives. We've had trilateral initiatives, which we have launched with Japan and France in this particular endeavor. And I'm so happy that we now have another one with the United States in the center, which will take this idea forward.
So we'll have to wind up this discussion now. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, for joining us in DD India Live. Thank you, Akshay Dongre, for tracking the latest from the Bharat Mandapam. You're watching DD India Live. Still to come on the show. G20 leaders pay homage to Mahatma Gandhi at Rajghat in New Delhi. President of Indonesia and Brazil hand over a sapling to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the third session of the G20 summit called One Future. And in a homecoming of sorts, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his wife Akshata Murthy offer prayers at the Akshardham temple in New Delhi.
Welcome to Jaipur.
You're watching DD India Live. I'm Tanvi Taneja. A quick look at the top stories of this hour. India hands over G20 presidency to Brazil. President Lula da Silva congratulates India for its effective leadership. World showers praise on the New Delhi's leader declaration for striking a balance on Ukraine. And Morocco declares a 3-day national mourning as the death toll crosses 2,000. Survivors of the quake sleep out in the open. You're watching DD India Live. Let's now take a look at some other stories making news across India. The host city of the G20 summit, New Delhi, experienced heavy rainfall overnight, and in the early hours of Sunday, the capital recorded a minimum temperature of 23.5 degrees Celsius. Rains cleared up the sky and it led to increased humidity. The India Meteorological Department has predicted rains to continue on Monday as well. Indian Border Roads Organization will be constructing world's highest fighter airfield at Neoma in Ladakh. The foundation stone of this project will be done by Defence Minister Rajnath Singh on September 12th from Devak Bridge in Jammu. In a major achievement, India's first ever sun-studying spacecraft Aditya L1 completed its third move closer to Earth on Saturday. Indian Space Research Organisation said that the operation was carried out by the Telemetry Tracking and Command Network. The next maneuver is planned for September 15th around 2 a.m. Indian Standard Time, marking another important step in this groundbreaking mission to study the sun. Earlier this morning, G20 leaders and delegates visited the memorial site of India's father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. They paid their tributes at the complex known as Rajghat. They laid wreaths to honor the memory of Mahatma Gandhi at his final resting place. A black marble platform marks the spot of Mahatma Gandhi's lost rights. An eternal flame burns there in honor of the father of the nation. Now, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is now at the International Media Center at Bharat Mandapam in Pragati Maidan. Let's go live there. Situated within the New Delhi's Pragati Maidan area. This is the Bharat Mandapam. It has become the successful venue of the G20 summit, and right now Prime Minister Narendra Modi is at the International Media Center. It is located inside Bharat Mandapam. There we see enthusiastic crowd trying to take a selfie with the Indian Prime Minister. We also see a large presence of foreign media here. Our correspondent Vishal Baristo now joins us from the International Media Center. Vishal, what is the buzz there? Is everyone excited to see Prime Minister Narendra Modi there?
Well, absolutely. You can see Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's waving to the international media, and the media is so very excited. They are trying to have a glimpse of it. Some are trying to get as close as possible. All of them armed with their mics, with their TV cameras, and also with their mobile phones. And they are also excited to try and get in touch with him, try and speak to him. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi has had a hectic day, and today it's been a great success. Inclusion of African continent, a great success. Delhi Declaration, another feather in the already feathered crown of India. And now Brazil would take over. But we have 2.5 months to go. There you see Prime Minister waving at the international media. He's an international star now. He's leading India. He's led India to great success. I've spoken to a lot of international journalists, and they are all praised for the Indian Prime Minister. They say that he is not only raising the voice of the global south, but also the voice of India, and he has led India to a great success. There you see Prime Minister Narendra Modi waving to the journalists, and they all gathered armed with their mobile phones, armed with their cameras, camera crews, all ready. You can see Prime Minister Narendra Modi passing through the international media, just waiting for the chance.
Yes. Vishal, you have been inside the premises of the Bharat Mandapam, the Crafts Bazaar there, the International Media Center there. If you could run us through how elaborate, how state-of-the-art this convention center has been and will be for future summits like these.
Well, it's been a long journey, and today is the finale we see on our screens and all over the world, because India has had 60 meetings across the country. Culture, finance, youth, everybody covered. And it was all to showcase the strength of India, our cultural heritage, our history, our geography, art, tourism, everything. Not only that, our food. And today here at the Bharat Mandapam, it was not only the journalists, but also the diplomats who came in large numbers to the Craft Bazaar, and they also shopped there. And they were also very happy because the Craft Bazaar had a glimpse of India, every state proudly presenting their product. It was ODOP, one state, one product, and they were also happy to shop there because they were getting the chance to buy anything from India across the country, and the memories that they would be taking back, they would be so very happy to not only be part of this successful G20, because the declaration, Delhi Declaration, came up with all the positivity. So we saw how Bali had differences over Ukraine, but this time it was absolutely a unanimous decision. Tanvi?
All right, we leave it here. Thank you very much, Vishal Barrister, for joining us and giving us the latest from the Bharat Mandapam. Moving on, the coverage of the G20 in 4K resolution format has been a success. DD India used this opportunity as a launchpad. Our correspondent Vishal Barrister spoke to India's Information and Broadcasting Secretary, Apurv Chandra.
It has been a successful ending of G20 Delhi, and I have with me the Secretary of Information and Broadcasting. Let's talk to him and find out, because the world has appreciated this event, and I have also spoken to some of the foreign journalists and they are very appreciative about it. Sir, the international media has responded very positively. So as the Secretary of the department, how do you feel?
The success of the G20 summit, of course, has been in the document which has been signed and concluded under the guidance of, under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, and that has been agreed to by all the nations who are participating here. But apart from that, the facilities here are world class. I had said this 3-4 days before the summit that this will set the gold standard, and I am sure that all the reporters who are here, they will vouch for that this media center is the best, which the kind of media center which they would not get anywhere else in the world.
Sir, it was quite an achievement for Doordarshan also. From HD we moved to 4K. So how would you react to that?
It is a landmark achievement for Doordarshan to move from HD to 4K. I think it is a moment like Asiad, where we moved from black and white to color. And I think now, since Doordarshan has shown its capability in making 4K transmission, and that transmission has been used throughout the world. So this will change a paradigm, and I think Doordarshan will keep doing well and use more and more 4K technology in future.
Well, absolutely. And one last question. The new baby of Doordarshan, DD India, it was quite a litmus test for it, and it was also the launching pad. So how do you feel now?
DD made a lot of efforts to revamp the DD India as its international channel, and this was the absolutely right time when the G20 event was happening, and as the entire world was watching India and also Doordarshan. And I think DD India has done very well, and it is a launchpad which will make Doordarshan respected not only in India but throughout the world.
Well, absolutely, and why not? This was the test, and we have passed it in flying colors. With cameraman Ajit in Delhi, this is Vishal Barrister for DD India.
You're watching DD India Live, still to come in the bulletin. Morocco mourns quake victims as death toll passes 2,000. In a surprise move, Japan's Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi meets Ukraine's President Zelensky in Kiev. And Hurricane Lee was downgraded to Category 3 storm, but still remains powerful as it nears the Caribbean.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such change makers.
Watch Change Makers on DD India.
India that invents. India that innovates. India that excites. India that invites. Land of possibility. Teeming with opportunities. Watch India Ideas each Thursday, 8 p.m. only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Live. I'm Tanvi Taneja. Let's now take a look at some more stories making news across the world. US President Joe Biden has landed in Hanoi, Vietnam, after concluding his visit to India for the G20 summit. Before his departure, he and other G20 world leaders paid homage at Mahatma Gandhi's memorial in India's capital, New Delhi. Officials say that during his visit to Vietnam, the talks will be focused on semiconductors and critical minerals. The US has been pushing for the upgrade for months, as it sees the Southeast Asian nation's manufacturing dynamo as a key country in its strategy to secure global supply chains from China-related risks. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi made a surprise visit to Ukraine on Saturday. Hayashi met Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine's top officials. They both agreed to begin discussions on security guarantees and cooperate on restructuring Ukraine's economy. Hayashi pledged support from both the public and private sectors in Japan to reconstruct Ukraine's economy. Maldives is now headed for a runoff vote after the opposition candidate Mohamed Moizu fell short of an outright majority in the first round of presidential election. Moizu took a surprise lead in Saturday's election with 46% votes, while President Ibrahim Mohamed Solih polled around 40%. The runoff election between the two will be held on 30th of September. Senegal's President Macky Sall has nominated Prime Minister Amadou Ba as the ruling coalition's candidate for the February 2024 presidential election. Ba, the former economy minister and foreign minister, is a taxation specialist. He was appointed prime minister of the country in September last year. After violent unrest in the West African country, Sall declined running for a third term, giving room for others to contest ahead. Hurricane Lee, that weakened on Saturday to a Category 3 storm, is expected to move north of Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands this weekend. But it is expected to strengthen again. The US National Hurricane Center evaluates that it could cause dangerous beach conditions on the US East Coast beginning Sunday. On to Africa now. The Moroccan government has declared 3 days of national mourning after a massive earthquake rocked the North African country. The death toll has crossed 2,000, while around 1,500 are injured. DD India's Alex Cadier reports from Marrakesh.
Hundreds of families in Marrakesh, in western Morocco, are spending sleepless nights outdoors after the devastating quake turned their lives upside down.
My kids were afraid. I could not leave them to go to work, so I stayed with them. I remained by their side, but when it comes to food, the shops close their doors. Here we are, enduring hunger and thirst.
Friday's earthquake is Morocco's deadliest in at least 6 decades. The epicenter was 72 kilometers southwest of Marrakesh. The major tremor turned many buildings into rubble, including a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the heart of the old city. Rescue workers are racing against time to find the survivors while the death toll is rising. Countries across the world, including India, the US, Germany, and France, have offered assistance. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the disaster from the G20 summit in New Delhi.
औपचारिक कार्रवाई शुरू से पहले हम सभी की ओर से कुछ देर पहले मोरक्को में आए भूकंप से प्रभावित लोगों के प्रति मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं।
Thousands of people need help. The quake has left them in a desperate situation, one that will take many years to recover from. Abhishek Bose for DD India.
And DD India's Alex Cadier now joins us live from Marrakesh. Alex, give us the latest on the situation regarding the earthquake and also tell us which are the international agencies that have come forward to help in rescue and relief efforts.
Well, the current situation in Marrakesh is one of trying to come back to business as usual. You can see there's a busy market square behind me, going back to business as usual. As I said, bustling, tourists coming in, buying juices, buying sunglasses, buying the kind of things that you would when you're on holiday. That is one aspect, but looming over all of that for the residents of Marrakesh in particular is the fear of aftershocks and the fear of further tremors. That is a concern we've seen across the city. Thousands of people lining the streets, sleeping on the floor, not feeling safe enough to go home and to go back to their houses that they fear will not withstand an aftershock. That is one aspect. As you can see just behind me, that mosque lost its tower, which was 3 meters above the structure, as you can see, and that collapsed onto a car underneath. No one was hurt as far as we can tell. Now, the rubble has already been cleared, so the authorities are clearing things very quickly. Now, UNESCO, you were asking about those agencies. UNESCO has said it has put a plan forward to the Moroccan government to help rebuild some of the heritage sites, those protected sites that have been damaged. That is one aspect, but also the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, those are going to be taking action in those rural areas about an hour south of here, which have been very badly affected and very hard to get to, and that's what we'll hear from more in the next few hours.
Alex, what are the chances of finding more survivors in the debris? And also tell us what kind of economic loss are we talking about due to this earthquake?
Well, the chances of finding survivors diminish as time goes by. That is clear. The Red Cross has said time is of the essence, and the next 12 hours will be essential for the survival of people. We know the first 48 hours after a disaster are crucial, so that help has been rushed in. The military has set up a field hospital here in Marrakesh and camps in those rural areas so that people can find shelter if they've lost their homes. So that is a really big issue. As for the economic cost, well, we don't know yet. That will be hard to measure. One thing that people consistently come up to us as we're reporting here in Marrakesh, they say, please tell your viewers in India that Marrakesh will be back up and running and that they should continue to come visit and continue their trips to this country, because they are worried, of course, about the reputational impact and therefore the economic knock-on effects that a city like this that relies so heavily on tourism could be affected. So that rush to find survivors will be going even faster, even more frantic than ever before, but certainly that long-term concern, people in Morocco here saying we will go back to business as usual as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Alex Cadier. Alex Cadier reporting to us from Marrakesh, Morocco. On to Asia Cup updates now. Rain has affected the ongoing match between arch rivals India and Pakistan in the Super 4 encounter at the R. Premadasa Stadium in Colombo. There is no rain at the moment and the umpires are in